in the Noongar lands of southwestern Australia long before football. The 14 families of Noongar Boodja gathered together to celebrate their warriors' skills, strength, speed and bravery. In modern times, struggling to survive white settlement, the Noongar warriors rose once more, using their ancient skills to create Noongar Footy Magic.
There's Cable once again. This little fella's giving himself balance so he can give it to someone. And he does.
Contest now for Cable, he's fast enough. In trouble, but the little master does it beautifully. Towards the half-forward line and turn, boots towards the centre wing. Beautiful pass. Back towards the half-forward line and goes Henry.
It's never entered my head, ever, that I was too short to play the game. I would have been happy to have played on anybody, wouldn't have made any difference. I'd put it the other way around. If a bloke was on me that was, say, 6'6", he'd be the one that'd have the problem. See, my blokes would be kicking the ball a lot lower to the ground. So he'd be the one that'd be in trouble, not me.
Across towards Cable. Little fella's off. Stuck for goal.
He's put it through, I'd say. Yep.
Barry Cable has got to be the most professional thinking and acting footballer I've ever seen.
He was just an unassuming, dedicated professional in everything that he did.
He seems to be as though he's got about 25 fingers there as little Cable tries to get it out.
Now, I've always believed that a good big man would beat a good little man, unless he was a Superman. And Barry Cable was Superman.
Barry Cable is probably the most decorated player ever to play Aussie rules. Now, in 18 years, he played 406 games, won 23 major awards, and is said to be the best small player ever to play the game. And it all started in a small country town called Narrogin. Narrogin began life as a railway town about 50 years before Barry was born. The new railway was built through the heart of traditional Noongar country, bringing a flood of white settlers with grants to clear the land for wheat and sheep farms.
Well, I was born in Narrogin in 1943, and my first 18 years was in Narrogin.
Barry was one of 11 siblings born to a Noongar mother and an English father. He lived with his mother as his father passed away when he was 6. By the 1940s, most Noongars had been forced to move to reserves on the outskirts of town. Until then, most of the Noongar people here were still living a largely traditional life.
My Noongar heritage means a lot to me personally because that's my mother. My mother was born in the Bookton Reserve, way back, of course. In those days, a lot of the families were very big. You know, they had like 12 and 14 in a family. Like I come from 11 myself.
Not many Noongars were allowed to work in town, but Barry's mum, known to everyone as Tiny, had a job at the local hotel.
In those days, it was a little bit hard because Indigenous people were sort of looked at as second class. I think my mother realised that for her to help herself and help her children, you know, she had to really get into the mainstream, and she did that. And I gave her fantastic credit for that. Later on, when I got older and I actually realised, you know, what she had to go through, and I could see now that she did a marvellous job.
Barry was a fair-skinned Noongar, blonde hair and blue eyes. And that caused quite a stir with the Noongars and the Wajula mob in town. But Barry's mother's brother, Bill, took Barry under his wing to make sure he spent time in country.
My uncle Bill was a rabbit trapper, and I used to go out with him, and you know, we'd go in the horse and cart, but sometimes we'd go through the reserve and he'd pull up and he knew a few of the people there. All these Noongar people obviously were looking at me and sort of saying, who's this little Wujala boy you got with you, because of the light skin that I have, like my mother. They were wondering who this little white boy was sitting next to Bill. Here I am standing here now in Narrogin, 57 years later, and so behind me was where my home was and where I started off my life as a youngster. In those days, houses are a lot different to what they are today. But our place was a kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and that was about it. So it was pretty small, but at the end of the day, there's only my mother and I there at the end anyway. I can still remember getting around with the other boys in the town, and we had all sorts of fun, and particularly down by the creek there, catching the jilgies. In those days, it looked so much bigger than it does now. It looks so much smaller now. And when I was a kid and we were running around here, it looked like a huge big river. And, you know, it looked as though you had to take a while to get across the other side. Whereas when I'm looking now, 2 steps and you're across there. I managed to get hold of a footy. It wasn't the greatest footy out, but it was a football. And I used to kick with my mates, and we used to just kick and kick and kick all the time. In fact, I used to kick on this road, and my mother used to come out and tell me, it's time to come in. That was true. I used to kick until virtually it was dark and you couldn't see anymore. So I got the message, come inside, please. In the early days, when I was really practicing, I'd kick the top of my toe off. I realised then, do better. In other words, be a more skillful kick.
I doubt very much if I ever saw Barry going along the street without a football in his hand. He was a man who only thought football was his life. In fact, he wanted it to be his life.
One of the great things about being at primary school was the footy on the Fridays. When we used to go away, the teachers used to pick a little team, and the school bus would come and we'd all be happy, naturally, getting onto the school bus. The kids were really terrific. Boys and girls came out, clapped us on the bus, sent us on our way, and so you could appreciate how, you know, pumped up we were. We'd go down to Williams, we'd play Williams, we'd go to Wagen, we'd go to Wickerpin, and then we'd come back to school on the Monday, and if we had a good win on the Friday, it was even better still, because you'd be talking about what happened at the game.
Before he left primary school, Barry had already made up his mind that football would be his life.
There were other kids at school who were about his age that were very, very good footballers, but none of them seemed to have his purposeful approach to the game. And while the others had the skills of handball and marking and kicking, they didn't have the football knowledge. He seemed to have the ability to read a game, and he was a past master, even at 13 years of age, at playing a kick behind the game.
One day I was coming home from one of the football games, and the principal said to me, Cable, go to the office, I want to have a chat to you. So I'm thinking, oh gee, what have I done wrong? And I'm trying to think, what have I done wrong here? And I couldn't think that I'd done anything wrong. Of course, when I got into the office, he then said to me, I think that you should be concentrating more on your education rather than playing footy. Because he said, I have heard that you have been telling other kids around the place that you were going to be a champion footballer. But I'm pleased I concentrated on me footy.
For little skinny Barry, a tad over 5 foot tall, the Narrogin football field was a magical place.
I can remember when I first went down to the Imperial Footy Club. They were the black and whites, you call them the Magpies. I'd just get so disappointed when the team would be announced and I wouldn't be in it. I used to cry to my mum and tell her that, you know, I can't understand why I'm not in the team, because, you know, I can't see from our training and that I'm not as good as some of these other guys in running and kicking the ball and all that sort of stuff. I was just looking for an opportunity to prove myself, and you can't prove yourself unless you can get out onto the ground. And then once I did that, well, I never looked back. I was talking to a gentleman who took me for gymnasium, and I used to love me gymnasium type work, and he said, you know, if you could get hold of some weights and do some weights, it'd be terrific for you. And I can always remember looking down and seeing these weights, and I thought, oh, that'd be a good idea. I should really do something about those, because no one else has ever used them. So I used to put one heavy one in my bag each night I went home from training. And so as you can appreciate, by the end of a few weeks, I had the weights at home, and the hardest thing was then trying to figure out how to take the bar home. So anyway, I waited till I was last out of the change rooms, put it on the bike, and as you can appreciate, there's a fair bit hangover on both sides. But wobbling home on it, I eventually got home on it. Still have them today. They're still around, and they're only on borrow, so, you know, if anybody still wants them, they're still available.
In a town full of racial divide and curfew for Noongar people, Barry fell in love with a Wodjila girl named Helen.
You know, the first time you fall in love, the first time you have a kiss. I mean, you remember all of those things, and you know where it was. As she was going to school, I'd just left school, became an apprentice butcher, My boss used to say, Barry, it's nearly 3:30, so I believe Helen will be coming along the street. So I used to go out and clean the shop window and Helen will be coming along after school, and this happened virtually every day. It was fantastic. I can remember some mornings, and she might laugh listening to this, but I can remember some mornings when I used to be delivering the meat, I used to know the school bus that she was on going up to the Narrogin High School. She used to be in the back of the bus with her girlfriends, and they'd be waving to me, and I'd be out the back on my bike, chasing after it, of course, and it just so happened I'd catch the bus coming around the corner, and I'd be shooting behind, and I'd have Helen waving with her girlfriends out the back of the bus.
In 1961, Barry moved to Perth with his mum and brother to play for the Perth Football Club. Helen and her family joined him a year later. For Barry, everything was falling into place.
I was very fortunate I ran across a fellow by the name of Dr. Frank Pike. He used to take me to the UWA, and I used to do what they used to call a sergeant jump, which was how far you could actually jump off the ground and reach up and touch a certain target. And I'm pretty sure that I did a 29-inch jump, which is a big jump. So I knew that I could leap pretty high off the ground. And that's the reason why I never really bothered about my height, because I knew whoever I played on, I could get up high enough to spoil the ball.
Barry quickly realised that as a small man, he needed to be strong as well as quick. He began an extreme weightlifting program to build his upper body, at the same time refining his kicking, tackling and handball skills. This would become his routine for 18 years, transforming him into Perth's #1 rover, described as cat-like, small but deadly.
I started off on the wing because I played mainly in the country. I played on the wing and in the centre. But during the 63 season, they used to change me from time to time to have a run on the ball as a rover. And I can remember going to Ernie at the end of 63 and I said to him, Ernie, are you going to play me as a rover next year? And he said, well, there'll be a chance. Well, I said, I need to know, because I said, if I'm going to rove, I need to do a lot more work during the summer. What else can I do to improve my game? And he said, well, work on your skills. Try to get your skills up to a really high level. He said, you're skillful now, but he said, get them up to such a degree. And I said, why? And he said, 2 reasons why. One is you'll become a better player. 2, you'll become very destructive to the opposition. So it just all made sense. I mean, the pennies just went. So then I went away and, of course, trained very hard during 63. And in my first year as a rover in 64, I won the Sandover medal.
In 1966, Perth appointed Mal Atwell as coach. It was with Mal that Barry made his next major breakthrough as a strategic player.
I stated to them that if I was to accept the coaching job at Rathline Park, then Barry Cable had to be part of that contract. He stayed with us and was probably instrumental, the player that had the most influence on the team.
The weapons that Barry could provide for Mal were the ability to kick stab passes with pinpoint accuracy or long kicks to his teammates anywhere on the ground, effectively directing the play.
I really could kick the ball long and accurate, or I could kick it short and accurate. He came up to me one day and he said to me, he said, listen, he said, we've got to use your kicking ability more. And I said, oh yeah, okay, well what do we do? He said, what I'd like to see happen, he said, is that when you're clear or you're down in defence or you're coming out, that the guys handball you the ball and then you can kick it over a long distance, so then you can skip the first line. He was looking at the fact that I could clear the ball and get it going quickly before there was any gathering of players down there.
Mal Atwell used Barry's deadly precision kicks and a game-changing strategy that would carry all before it, winning 3 premierships in a row.
A lot of people have never really appreciated that that was a part of what Mal did as a coach.
Cable was cat-like in his reflexes. He just did things tremendously quickly. He was probably the most single-minded player that you'd come across. He was the most dedicated to perfecting not only his own skills, but his whole approach to the game was so enthusiastic that it had to brush off on the other players.
I thought he was the master on the field with the Perth side. They were a good side, there's no question about that. I'd say he was the general, the top man that enabled Perth to win the 3 premierships.
I basically played my game really from sort of when I was on the ball from fullback to half forward. I very rarely went down the forward line unless I was resting down there. And I did that purely and simply because I could kick over the lines. So in other words, if I was coming away from defence, I could go over past the centre line and virtually go straight into the half forwards. We'd go to training on a training night, and the big guys would get at both ends of the ground, be going up for marks and all that. We, the littler blokes, would be down on the ground, crumbing the ball. So that when you played on Saturday, that's what you'd be doing. They don't do that today.
In 1970, after winning 3 premierships and many awards with Perth Football Club, Barry decided to take his chances in the VFL. He would end up with a 1-year contract with North Melbourne.
Ron came over as a young man in 1969 and wanted me to go to Victoria.
We were seen as a downtrodden, unsuccessful club.
He came and he stirred me up about the fact that poor old North Melbourne never won a premiership, being down the bottom, how are we going to get up if we can't get good players, all that sort of stuff. We went to them in 1970, won 3 games, which was an absolute disaster from a playing point of view, or a team point of view, I should say. But I was very fortunate. I won their club fairest and best and won a couple of other prizes. So I was really happy with my own personal form, but very disappointed that we didn't do well as a club.
Cabes was 4th in the Brownlow medal, but played brilliantly, was absolutely professional. So that was the time when North really started to get its teeth into the brilliant Barry Cable.
A contractual dispute in 1970 led to Barry going back to Perth for 3 more years before returning to North Melbourne.
The process in getting him to Melbourne was very difficult because he was such a champion. I mean, he was at the top of the tree in WA, in the waffle. They negotiated some outrageous deal at the time. It was 1970 and they wanted a $75,000 bond or something like that. We just kept on saying yes so that we could get him. It wasn't until North started to catch fire when Barassi arrived in 73 and he came back that he realised all the things that he probably wanted to realise, and that was to be the great success in premiership sides in Melbourne.
On his return, Barry delighted and stunned the crowd with his unique style of play, particularly his crumbing.
When I was playing, holding the ball rule was if you got rid of the ball before you were touched or tackled, it was a free kick to you. And of course, in those days, if you were quick enough to get rid of the ball just as a bloke was about to tackle you, you get yourself a free kick. I mean, they were the rules. And of course, that used to drive supporters mad, particularly opposition supporters. And I used to do it as a bit of an art because I could actually bounce the ball. The bloke didn't grab me, the ball would come back and I'd take it. It's a no-win situation for the guy that's after me.
Barry was so good at this technique that the VFL changed the holding the ball rule to stop others from copying him.
When you do a kick or a hand pass, or you take a mark, or you pick the ball up, and you've been training all the time to do these things, it's a real buzz. It's a real wow, that's fantastic. The training, they only do it in front of 5 people. All of a sudden, Saturday comes, 50,000 people, and they're doing the same thing, and it comes off. It's a real adrenaline rush. That's the pinnacle of the execution, is that if it's a goal, 50,000 people just go berserk.
North players.
My fondest memory of North Melbourne was their very first premiership in 1975, which we all really strived for, without doubt.
The 1975 grand final in Melbourne here, and a crowd of around about 115,000, 120,000 people, and the atmosphere is tremendous.
Nolan taps the ball down. Here's Cable, he's grabbed. Coming up now, Cable. Beautiful kick.
Whatever this guy does is right.
Chest down for Cable, he's fast enough. In trouble, but the little master does it beautifully. Towards the half-forward line and turn.
Big trotters after it. North Melbourne's first ever flag. The final scoreboard reads North Melbourne 19-8. 122, Hawthorn 9-13-67.
The ecstatic Barassi. Look at those North Melbourne players.
We had people coming up after the grand final, old people crying because they never thought they'd live to see the day that North had ever win a premiership. You've got to remember, they've been in the comp for 50 years, so it's a long, long time, and they've never won one. You just couldn't get any better than that.
It was an enormous plus for Barassi as a coach as well, to have a player like him.
From then on, it was just really a bonus that we went on and played in 76 and 77 and won another premiership in 77 and played in all those final games.
The VFL ladder after home and away season.
After 3 grand finals and 2 premierships, in 1976 the Cable family returned to WA. Barry was to become the captain coach of East Perth, replacing Polly Farmer. His assistant was Grant Dorrington.
He asked me to be the assistant coach, and I had this wonderful journey because with Cabes, we won the 78 grand final. People will remember, poured with rain after half-time. I was on the boundary line, Barry played.
I reckon it was one of the most remarkable grand finals ever, was the 78 East Perth. Because of the position that we came from to win the premiership, I can't remember another team that has come from that position to win it. They were terrific players, terrific team.
In 1979, Barry was 36, but had no plans for retirement. As captain coach of East Perth, he was in prime condition and on the hunt for more premierships, but fate intervened.
All that was told to me was that he had a leg injury and that it was nothing to worry about.
I was trying to figure out how to start the tractor, and being reasonably strong, I actually cranked it and it was in gear, and of course it just came straight forward and backed me up against the shed, and I just moved out of the way, which I do in footy, and it just went bang up against the shed. I went to turn the key off on the tractor, and unfortunately I swung my leg around and got caught underneath the tractor, and that was the end of that.
We had to chock the back wheels and jack the tractor off him. It wasn't a pretty sight. There wasn't much left of his leg.
It was a traumatic injury that removed his whole calf muscle off his leg.
When the word amputation sort of came up was probably when it hit me that it wasn't just a leg injury, it was just a little more than that.
Barry would not allow them to take his leg off. What he had was the components to offer the surgeon. An absolute strength of mind that he can overcome anything in this world. Secondly, he had this enormously fit body. He was so fit. The surgeons took the muscle off the back of his thigh and his bottom, put it on his leg and rebuilt the bottom half of Barry's leg. Even with his leg in hospital, he still believed that he could coach. Now remember, we didn't have mobile phones and all those things, the communication lines you have today. What he had was listen to the radio and send me through a message. By anyway, if he could get to someone, ring up the club on the landline and tell him, he would get the message down to me.
I said, listen, Doc, I said, I've got to get to the game on Saturday. And he said, well, you can't go. And I said, well, I have to go. I need to coach and I need to be there. I'm going to go. I've got to go. So anyway, he organised a nurse to go with me, and she sat alongside of me during the game, and then straight back to hospital.
For 4 years, Barry rebuilt his leg. He was absolutely determined that it wouldn't stop him in his tracks.
He's so focused on being great, and you have to do that. I mean, people that are great, doesn't matter what sport they're in or what part of life, they've got to have this inner mental strength of believing in themselves. Cabes had it.
In his 3,500-kilometre statement of his absolute determination to succeed, he rode from Subiaco Oval to the MCG to toss a coin for the grand final in a special tribute to Indigenous players. Barry went on to a long and successful coaching career with East Perth, North Melbourne and the West Australian State of Origin Carnival. He was a master of the game.
If Cabes had played all of his football in Melbourne, he would be revered now in football like John Coleman, Ron Barassi, Ted Whitten, Darryl Bullock, all of the greats. I mean, he's joined them now as a legend, which took a bit of time coming. He's right up there with the greatest players of all time.
I said to him one day, Barry, look, if you weren't a champion footballer, what would you be? He said, I'd be an Olympic gold medalist in cycling, or I'd be an Olympic boxer. not just an ordinary good boxer. I mean, talking Olympic gold medal. That's the height he jumps to.
The greatest achievement that's ever happened to me has been my family, without question. There's no comparison between the football and my family. I'd always take my family first to footy. I'd like to think that people would be able to say that that guy gave everything. That's all I'd want to be known as, is a person who's given everything that he has in every game that he played. That'd be more than enough. More than enough.
Well, everyone loves a hero, and Barry